Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and help you get genuinely well informed. Today we're looking at something pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's this intersection of, well, politics, economics, and culture playing out in big cities.
And we're diving into a specific, quite powerful libertarian critique. It's about what some commentators are calling a kind of socialist shift in American urban policy.
That's right. We're focusing on an article, Doug Casey, on the rise of the Socialist Mayor in New York. Our mission today is really to unpack the arguments these commentators are making.
So we'll look at their analysis of this one political victory in New York City, but also their, broader takes on U.S. politics, society.
And even the sort of philosophical ideas behind their concerns. The goal is for you, the listener, to get a real sense of this specific perspective on recent events and what they think the long-term consequences might be.
Okay. And the source material itself, it sounds like it doesn't pull any punches.
No, not at all. It's framed as a really stark critique. It mixes ideology, economics, cultural commentary. It's quite comprehensive, gives us a lot to talk about.
Right. So let's start with the specific case study they focus on. This figure, Zoran.
Yes, Zoran. The article describes him as, 33 years old, charismatic, definitely a political outsider, and he won the Democratic primary in New York.
Okay. And how do these commentators, Doug and Matt, how do they frame that win? Is it just a primary win to them?
Well, no, that's the key thing. They argue his primary victory is, for all intents and purposes, the actual election win.
Because of New York's political landscape.
Exactly. They see the Democratic primary as the only race that really matters there, and they characterize his ideology pretty clearly.
Which is hard.
Hard left. That's the label they use.
Got it. And his policy ideas reflect that, I assume. Things like city-owned grocery stores, free public transport.
Yeah, and strict rent control, significantly higher taxes on the wealthy. Pretty bold proposals.
And the commentators' reaction, are they like, okay, interesting ideas, or?
Oh, not even close. They flat out call these ideas stupid and evil.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Their view is basically that these policies might sound good, offering quick fixes or free stuff, but they see them as traps. Economically illiterate traps is how they'd probably put it. They think it appeals to voters who don't understand economics, but will just, destroy things in the long run.
Interesting. And they make a comparison that seems maybe unexpected between Zoran and someone like Donald Trump.
Right. It seems counterintuitive at first, but their argument isn't about the specific ideology. It's about the method.
Okay, how so?
They link Zoran's charm and his promises of, they call them gimmies, freebies, easy benefits.
Right.
They link that directly to Trump's populist tactics. They're saying both leaders, despite being on different ends of the spectrum, are basically exploiting public ignorance about economics.
So, Zoran promising free transit is, in their view, similar to Trump saying he'll eliminate income tax on tips or get Mexico to pay for a wall.
Exactly. The core idea is it's about offering something for nothing, appealing to a lack of economic understanding. Their big takeaway is that modern U.S. politics, left or right, thrives on this kind of populism because, they believe the public just doesn't get economics.
Which leads nicely into their next point, this broader concern about economic literacy itself.
Yeah, they really lean into this. They argue there's been a major decline in economic understanding across the U.S.
Especially among certain groups.
Particularly people living paycheck to paycheck, is their claim. They believe this group is uniquely susceptible to arguments based on envy or economic fallacies.
Making them easy targets for promises of, say, wealth redistribution.
That's the idea. Voters are drawn to these promises, the commentators argue, without really grasping what they see as the inevitable negative consequences down the line.
And this isn't just about economics for them, right? It ties into a bigger picture of America shifting left, ideologically. We actually did a deep dive before on Michael Moore's list suggesting America was moving left. How does this compare?
That's a great connection. Because where Moore saw those trends, the 20 indicators as positive signs.
Right.
Doug and Matt see those exact same things as, symptoms. Symptoms of a growing collectivism, a socialist direction, which they think is fundamentally bad for the country.
Okay. And how does Zoran fit into that picture for them? Is he just another symptom?
They actually see him as something more. Because of his background, raised by professors, they say, deeply influenced by Marxist thought, they paint him as a true believer, not just someone going along with trends, but someone deeply committed to this ideology, class struggle, state control.
Which makes him different from other mayors they might criticize.
Yeah, exactly. They contrast him with someone like Karen Bass in LA, who they basically just dismiss as incompetent. But Zoran, because they see him as ideologically driven, they label him dangerous. It's his conviction they find particularly concerning.
So given this pretty bleak assessment, economic decline, dangerous ideologies taking hold, it makes sense they start talking about, well, escape routes.
It does follow logically from their perspective. The conversation shifts to strategies, particularly for wealthy individuals, to get out from under what they see as an overreaching U.S. tax system and state.
And they suggest things like moving to Puerto Rico.
Yeah, as a sort of temporary step, maybe. A way station before potentially taking the full plunge into expatriation.
Which means giving up U.S. citizenship entirely.
Right. And Doug Casey himself actually expresses some personal regret here. Says he wishes he'd gotten New Zealand citizenship earlier, sees it as a missed boat.
Which implies it's not so easy to just cut ties, is it?
Apparently not. And they bring up the case of Roger Ver to illustrate that.
The Bitcoin guy.
Yeah, the early Bitcoin advocate. He renounced his U.S. citizenship, and later the IRS went after him. Doug and Matt use this as a kind of cautionary tale.
Showing how aggressively the U.S. enforces its rules, especially the exit tax.
Exactly. These are complex rules designed to tax people, often based on their net worth, when they give up citizenship. For the commentators, Ver's case is proof of just how tight the state's grip is, even when you try to leave.
Beyond the economic side, they also touch on demographic shifts in the U.S., linking them to cultural changes or what they term decay.
Yeah, they mention a recent census report.
What did it show?
It apparently showed a decrease in the white American population, not just as a percentage, but in actual numbers, too.
And they attribute this to specific cultural factors.
They do. They point to a few things. One is what they call incel culture, basically. Young white men avoiding relationships, not having kids.
Okay.
Another is what they term feminist dominance. Their argument is that women focusing on higher education and careers leads to delaying or skipping childbirth. And then just a general trend they observe toward lower birth rates overall, families having maybe one kid or none at all, even if they are partnered up.
So these aren't just stats to them. They reflect deeper cultural issues, even around things like family. They mention adoption too, right? With a Roman angle.
Yeah, it's a brief but interesting point. They bring up how Romans apparently used to adopt older individuals, people who had already proven themselves, rather than infants. And they contrast this, or at least one of the commentators does, with the idea that modern adoption can be psychologically tough on kids because of, perceived rejection by birth parents.
Implying maybe a shift away from pragmatism towards something else.
Perhaps. It feels like they might connect it to a sort of modern fragility, maybe, or a departure from what they'd see as more traditional grounded approaches.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, the politics, the economics, the demographics, the culture, it leads them to some pretty fundamental philosophical points, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There's this recurring idea, summed up by a quote they attribute to Lenin. The worse it gets, the better it gets.
Meaning what, exactly?
Right.
That total failure is necessary.
That seems to be the speculation. That maybe the system has to completely crash and burn for people to finally wake up and realize, in their view, the failures of socialism or collectivism.
And that connects to Nietzsche.
Yeah, they reference Nietzsche, specifically this idea, and it's a pretty radical interpretation, that maybe you shouldn't just lament societal decay. Maybe you should just, push it.
Push a failing system towards collapse.
Right. Not just for the sake of destruction, but to sort of clear the decks, make way for something new, something presumably more aligned with their libertarian ideals. It's a very provocative stance on change.
Definitely. And underlying all of it is this deep-seated view of the state itself.
Oh, absolutely. The state, in their commentary, is consistently portrayed as predatory.
They use that metaphor, right? About zebras.
Yeah, individuals are like zebras, and the state is the predator hunting them. It's a really stark image, but it perfectly captures their fundamental mistrust of government. They see it as an entity that inherently preys on its citizens, not serves them.
Wow. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've unpacked this really quite detailed libertarian critique, hitting on specific policies, populism, economic literacy concerns, demographic shifts.
And even these deep philosophical underpinnings.
Yeah. What really comes through, I think, is how connected they see everything. Policy, culture, individual liberty, it's all deeply intertwined for them.
Definitely. A political change in one city isn't just local news to them. It's like a flare signaling these much bigger ideological battles happening nationwide.
It's certainly been a revealing look into a very specific worldview. So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on.
Go for it.
Well, if you accept, even just for argument's sake, this idea that sometimes seeing a system's full consequences is necessary for understanding, what does that imply? What responsibility do individuals have? Do you try to prevent the crash, or following that Nietzschean idea they mentioned, do you maybe accelerate it?
Yeah, what are the real-world implications of believing that the worse it gets, the better it gets? It's a challenging question about how societal change actually happens, or perhaps how some believe it should happen. Lots to think about there.